Okay, nice. Now we are able to translate. If we're given an array, we can map them to a div here. Now it'd be nice to have some space between them, so I might want to add a class name here. Let's call it message. And then I'm going to go to the CSS, create a new selector dot message. Dot means class. So whenever an element has the class message, I want to add some margin bottom of 6 pixels. So they're not so glued together, something like that. Then you can add more styles if you see fit. Okay, now it'd be nice if I could word wrap here because I don't like scrolling here. Harder to see. Settings, editor, word wrap. Let's see. Oh, there you go. On. Oh, there you go. Now I have word wrap, so it won't require me to scroll. As you can see it here. It's breaking to the next line. Anyway. All right, so this is nice, but we must get these messages from a server. So how do we do that in React? Well, typically, if you want to fetch or make a HTTP request, it's called a side effect. So they have a hook called useEffect for that. Let me try to make useEffect. Call it like this, and you pass a function as the argument. Can be a function keyword or arrow function, doesn't matter. So if you do it like that, React is not defined, so we have to import React from React. Colon. Let me just do something here. Let me try put a console log React use effect to see if it's being called at all. Where's the console? Oh no, I don't have access. That sucks. Anyway, a React function component will render and return the template. But every time the state or props given to this component changes, it will re-render it. That means this function will be called again. Now, useEffect is something that is called every time after render. So if this component renders again, this function that's passed to useEffect will be called. But now, usually when we fetch data, we want to call it only once. So that means the component mounts, that is, it has a first render, then we start fetching the data, and then we're done. We don't want to fetch data again after the second render because it'll be crazy. Like every time something changes in the React component, like the state or props, which happens very often, it would be getting the data again, and we don't want to do that. So the second argument to useEffect hook is an array of what's called dependencies. So what it means is if you pass some variable here, that's a dependency, meaning if that variable changes, then we call this function. Now, if you leave it empty, that's a special case, meaning it only runs once after the first render. And that's what we want when we're fetching the data. So the moment this component mounts, it's going to fetch the data. Okay, but before we get there, we need to find a way to store the messages in a way that if we start off initially with empty messages, right, because we haven't fetched them from the backend server API, and then we use effect to load that data, grab the data, and then eventually we want to inject them here in messages. But React must know when the value of messages changes. If you do it normally like this, messages equals whatever, for some reason I reset it, React will not know that you changed messages because it only keeps track of state and props. So the only way for React to react to the change in the messages variable is to place that value in the React state. Okay, once it's in the state, React is tracking it, so it will detect, oh, you changed the value of messages, now I'm going to re-render. Okay, so we must place messages under the state. Now to do that, we use another hook, HOOK, that's called the useState hook. So here for messages, I would have to do React.useState. Now the way it works is first you pass an initial value. Okay, I want the messages to be an empty array at first, so square brackets. Now, when I call the useState, it returns an array of two things, two elements. The first element is the variable to access that value for messages, and the second is the function to change that value. Now, what people typically do is they destructure. It's a JavaScript thing that we can use like this notation, messages, set messages, meaning it will take this right-hand side, it's an array. So we'll take the first element and store that in the messages variable. It will take the second element and store in the set messages variable. Now I name these messages and set messages because I think it's very descriptive of what they are. You can name it whatever you want. The convention is, okay, what you're storing? It's the messages. And then I always name the function to be set followed by whatever this name is. Set messages, and it's always camel case. Camel case meaning the first letter is lowercase and every word that follows the first letter is uppercase. Okay, now we have that in the state. I'm going to delete the plain array there. Now, with this in mind, I have a messages that I can access that is initially empty. And you can see here the mapping operation, there's nothing on the screen. But if I added the initial state here, you're going to see it's there again. Okay, I don't want anything for initial state, so I'm going to remove it. So it becomes like that again. But to demonstrate that set messages works, I'm going to delete this console log here. And I'm going to call set messages here with that array of 3 strings.